the $250 million diversion to the general fund, $121 million to pay pension obligations, plus funding to support the program. So what happens then in 2011-12, there wasn't enough tobacco settlement money to support the programs like smoking cessation and health research and those programs. So, and you would have that perpetual cash flow problem moving forward. So what the government proposed was put the tobacco fund money in the general fund. The general fund can support those programs until the tobacco fund revenue comes in the next year, so we can keep those programs whole. And what it does is exactly what you said. It does give you a one-time bump of $140 million in fiscal year 11-12. And that's so out of necessity to keep those programs intact, it does give a one-time bump, which we won't have in 2012-13, which sort of gets to the point of maintaining any surplus in 2011-12 would be helpful to have in 2012-13.
So when you make the statement further back in the slide about utilize no revenue or expenditure gimmicks, that's not a revenue or expenditure gimmick in your mind?
If we didn't have to do it that way, we wouldn't have done it that way.
Okay.
But we're kind of boxed into the corner on that one.
Okay. I understand. Now, you talk about at slide 7 that there's an increase in revenue, and I guess this is projected for 2010, 2011, the current budget, and next year's budget, a projected increase in revenue of $528 million?
Over 2 years, and what then the press release you referred to earlier indicates that number would be even higher than what we have plugged in here.
So potentially, when we talk about projections, you have somebody in your office that's really trying to figure out where it's going to go, but this is not an exact science?
It is the Department of Revenue that provides the revenue projections, and you can say it's a lot of science, but a little bit of art as well.
Okay.
If we all had crystal balls and knew how the economy was going to turn, what was going to impact different things, do we know exactly how unrest in the Middle East is going to impact the economy, and could you plug in a number to that? Well, there's probably a little bit of art and some science to that, so it's not exact. All
right. So when we look at, I'm looking at slide 3. I'll go back to slide 3 for a little bit. When we look at the ending balance, at least in slide 3, the middle one, the mid-year revision, you have an ending balance of minus $155 million.
$155 million is what was projected mid-year.
Okay. And then you turn to slide 9, and you're hoping, again, a little bit of art, you're hoping that if Governor Corbett gets all his wishes and can get the budget that he really wants, that you're going to have an ending fund balance of $586 million. Is that correct?
That, actually, we expect that to occur. That's the 2010-11 budget.
All right.
So we're expecting at least that now.
All right.
And based on revised projections that we just got, that number could be a little bit higher.
So, and that was my question. When was slide 9 prepared? Because I have a document that is very similar to the document that you're putting into evidence here. I have the PowerPoint that was produced by your office on March 8th of 2011.
Yeah, we updated this
a
couple of weeks ago.
All right.
But before, we had the latest revenue projections.
All right.
So we'll probably do one more update.
So this, when we're looking at an ending balance of a projected ending balance of $586 million for the current year, that projection, that artwork that you put together here, that was done before the Department of Revenue announced the surplus on May 2nd?
Correct.
Okay.
And sir, this panel will be deliberating well into June, so if there are updated projections, I just ask that you provide it to the Commonwealth attorneys, and they can provide it to the panel. Thank you.
Keep in mind, any additional spending in the current year or the next is going to impact the structural issues in 2012-13. And that's what the governor is working to preserve. This is going to take us several years to get out of. We didn't get here overnight.
Now, at slide 14, which talks about adhering to fiscal discipline, the governor is proposing and has made a commitment. Really, he's making a choice here that there's going to be no new taxes or fee increases, correct? So when, and everybody's heard about it in the news, when we talk about Marcellus shale extraction, and people are talking about a severance tax, that we're going to tax these oil companies, Governor Corbett has made a decision, his own choice here, that he's not going to put that tax into effect, correct?
Governor Corbett campaigned on no new taxes. And the reason is Pennsylvania historically has had one of the worst tax climates of any state in the country. We are one of only a couple states that tax both corporate income and assets. We have the highest corporate net income tax in the country, and that is sort of the focal point for business site selectors when they're looking at site selection and expansion. And we stick out like a sore thumb. So he campaigned not to make our current our competitive tax climate worse, and that's what he's sticking to, and that's the reason why. And as far as Marcellus shale, I should note that for this year, corporate income from oil and gas companies, predominantly Marcellus shale natural gas, doubled to about $200 million. So for those who say, they're not paying taxes, well, we've seen it double to about $200 million. Also, it might be argued that here's an industry, if a company came to the General Assembly or Department of Economic Development and said, we'd like to invest about $10 billion in the state over the next several years, we'd have folks falling all over themselves to offer incentive packages to try to lure them here. Well, here we have an industry that's saying, we're going to invest about $10 billion in your state over the next several years, and now the cry is, well, let's tax you and make it as unpleasant for you as we possibly can. So here we have an industry. The strategy ought to be to leverage the assets, the technology, the expertise of that industry, not to make our comprehensive tax climate worse overall by adding yet another tax to Pennsylvania's litany of taxes already.
So let me if I understand you correctly, if I'm a manufacturer of just say widgets, okay, and I want to operate, or I'm proposing to operate in Pennsylvania, we don't want to tax that individual to such a degree that he decides, well, you know what, taxes in South Carolina are better, it's a better tax environment. So we want to create an environment here so that that maker of widgets comes to Pennsylvania, correct?
So that the environment is competitive for us to attract that manufacturer, yes.
Competitive with other states and other nations, correct?
Correct.
All right. So in this particular case, we're saying to the natural gas industry, even though the natural gas is under Pennsylvania, we don't want to drive them out of Pennsylvania. Is that what you're saying?
It is also under a number of other states.
Okay. And in fact, there are severance taxes in other states, are there not?
There are.
And in fact, in West Virginia, and I don't know if you're aware of this fact, but in West Virginia, there were more oil rigs, or whatever you call them, put into place, new ones last year in West Virginia than Pennsylvania, and they in fact have a severance tax. Are you aware of that?
They do have a severance tax.
Okay. But getting back to my original question, the governor has made a choice not to impose a severance tax, has he not?
The governor campaigned not to raise taxes in Pennsylvania. The voters of Pennsylvania elected him governor, knowing that that's what he campaigned on, and he committed to meeting his campaign promises.
Well, not that I want to get into that, but we've seen the polling data on his favorability rate since the budget
Objection.
came out, and
Not sure how that's at all relevant.
Well, that's, I mean, as much as I'd like to address the Marcellus shale tax, Fred tells me we don't have the authority to impose that tax, so.
We'd be more than happy and proud to concede that we will not increase taxes to generate new revenue.
And let me ask you this, has your office or any of the executive offices of the governor looked at what potential that type of tax would bring into the Commonwealth?
Yes. If you look at the severance tax proposal that former Governor Rendell had proposed, which would have been, from my understanding, is one of the most severe in comparison to other states, would have brought in about 170 to 200 million.
Okay.
So clearly would not have closed the $4.2 billion gap.
All right. Now, in addition to the Marcellus shale, there's other things that the governor did, and he calls them free enterprise job creation initiatives that he wants to put in place. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like, for example, his budget proposes to reinstate the capital stock and franchise tax phase out. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
And could you explain what that is?
I mentioned earlier that Pennsylvania is one of only a few states that taxes both income and assets. Capital stock and franchise taxes, in simple terms, the tax on assets.
Okay. And he's proposing to phase that or reinstate that phase out, correct?
Yes, the legislation to phase out this tax passed a decade or so ago and had been suspended a couple of times. And actually, he didn't have to propose the reinstatement because the reinstatement goes into effect without any action. And he simply did not propose to further suspend it.
Okay. He's also put into effect other tax credit programs, one like the film production tax credit. He wants to continue that, or he wants to put that back into effect?
Actually, his budget proposal would continue it at the current year level, which is a reduction from previous year levels.
Okay. Now, in doing so, and I think the Commonwealth stipulated to this, his theory is that he doesn't want to impose taxes to generate immediate revenue, but he thinks there's going to be a long-term benefit in job creation. Is that the theory behind it?
That's the theory, yes.
Okay. Sort of like the trickle-down theory that Reaganomics, or?
There are, if we ran a business and we were faced with a deficit like this, there's essentially three things you can do. You can raise your top-line revenue. You can implement process improvements or efficiencies that generate savings, or you can cut expenses. There's two ways to raise your top-line revenue if you're at the state. You can expand your economy, growing jobs, creating economic opportunity for your citizens, and bringing more money into the state. Or you can raise taxes, which inhibits economic growth and doesn't necessarily create economic opportunities for the citizens. In terms of process improvements, strategies, in 6 weeks to put together a budget, the new administration certainly didn't have time to do that, and any process improvements would not generate immediate savings for the 2011-12 budget. But working forward, hopefully some of those will come to fruition in 2012-13. And so the one major option that the governor had to get 2011-12 balanced was to cut expenses. And that's in large part what this budget reflects. Getting the fiscal discipline, sort of cutting out programs that have been, past their prime, those that are characterized as legislative initiatives, lambs. So eliminating a lot of programs, cutting spending to get to balance.
Now, one of the things that the budget does propose is that we get back to what, at least, I don't know if I'm using the phrase right, but we get back to what government's supposed to be about, something to that effect, it states.
Core functions.
Okay. And one of the